and welcome to Camp, Scary and Squee, a podcast that tests my theory that every horror movie exists on a scale of divine camp to pure terror. Each week I'm joined by a guest who brings a horror movie for discussion, dissection and classification on the Camp, Scary scale. When asked what he's looking for in a horror movie, my guest today wants a believable plot, a strong female lead and a chilling film score. Welcome, Fraser.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great, and thank you so much for joining me. What is haunting you this week?
I knew you were going to ask that. That's the one thing I probably haven't prepared. What is haunting me this week? We could probably talk about COVID.
Oh, yeah?
Is that? Yeah.
Well, you're in Scotland, so you've just gone from a bit of freedom to a bit less freedom.
Yeah, I think we got our hopes up, and they were quickly whipped away. So yeah, I think we're kind of anticipating further restrictions, probably going back to, I think, the R numbers through the roof again. Infection rates are up, and all the things that they've tried to reopen, they're now closing: schools, businesses, work from home as best you can, that type of stuff. So yeah, it's been challenging to say the least.
Yeah, well, so we're sort of at the end. I'm in Melbourne, so we've just come out of quite a strict lockdown. We had a curfew, and for most of the past 4 or 5 weeks, it's been like an hour a day that we were allowed outside. It was extended to 2 hours like a week ago, and now we're sort of stepping out of it. So the curfew's been lifted. We can go out after 9 p.m, which is very exciting because I live in an apartment and I have a dog, so her timing her toilet times was becoming quite a struggle. Like, this is your last chance, Stella. Use it well. But yeah, it's been something that's probably haunting everyone in the world at the moment.
And to varying degrees, of course. I mean, I think if you look at the rest of Europe, Spain came out of lockdown, now straight back in. Italy out of lockdown, straight back in. France the same. So yeah, I think we've been about 4 weeks behind the curve of the European countries, and again, not much has changed, and we don't seem to be learning much, from their experience either. To be fair,
yeah,
but it won't last forever. We need to keep reminding ourselves that. I suppose.
Yeah, that's right. Like, we're coming out at the other end now, and I feel like it's good. It's good to sort of focus on there is an end point. There's like an end that's coming in terms of being trapped in our homes. I'm going to give you the honours. I'd love to know what film you've chosen for us to discuss this week.
Again, I think we discussed prior to this that, I have to say, of all the film genres, horror's not necessarily at the top of my list, but it's a film I've rated for, as long as I can remember the first time I watched it. I've seen it multiple times since, and it's John Carpenter's Halloween.
Yes, and so some quick stats on Halloween. It is released in 1978, written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, and directed by John Carpenter, as you said. And starring, so top billing goes to Donald Pleasance, Jamie Lee Curtis, PJ Soles, and Nancy Loomis. And the film grossed $70 million on a $300,000 budget, which is, phenomenal, like such a huge amount of money for a film to be making. And the IMDb description, which is the all-important, tells us what we're expecting. 15 years after murdering his sister on Halloween night 1963, Michael Myers escapes from a mental hospital and returns to the small town of Haddonfield, Illinois, to kill again. And a spoiler warning, we're about to talk about this film, so you're probably going to find out some of the stuff, the reveals, the spoilers that you might not want to know if you haven't seen it before. So if you're listening to this and you haven't seen Halloween, pause the recording, go away, find Halloween on whatever provider you have and watch it because it's well worth it. Now, for those of you playing at home, Fraser and I met many years ago, like nearly 10 years ago.
Maybe 10 years, yeah.
When I lived in Scotland. And it's quite funny because you have this deep love of film. And while you say horror isn't a genre that you love, I think a lot of the films that you love often fall somewhere in the horror genre because you love Alien, you love Halloween, these kind of big blockbuster films that, while maybe not billed exclusively as horror, like Jaws is another one, they have horror elements, they have suspense, they have scares, And I'm wondering, sort of, what is it that you love about these kinds of films?
But again, if we look at the top three, I mean, maybe not Jaws. Well, actually, Jaws you could say is a strong female lead because she is a female shark. That's a bit of a stretch. I'll give you that, but certainly, one I mentioned was Alien. So you've got Sigourney Weaver playing Ripley. Another I would say, is in that kind of isn't it a horror movie is Terminator. So you've got Sarah Connor, played by Linda Hamilton. So again, that really strong female leads tends to be a bit of a theme. Really often a good soundtrack, and that believable plot. But again, that evaporates when you talk about a shark that follows people around over 4 films. When you've got aliens and folk traveling back in time, it begins to be a bit of a stretch. But certainly from a horror perspective, if it's going to freak me out, if it's going to, I'm going to have to sleep with the light on for the next 2 weeks. To me, it's got to be believable, and I think that's maybe where a lot of the horror movies that I would class as a horror movie in its purest sense falls down for me. I kind of think, what a lot of nonsense. It's not my cup of tea.
So for you,
Halloween.
I was going to say for you,
an enduring classic. I think they'll watch Halloween 100 years from now, and I think it will still creep folk out. That's how much of a fantastic film it is. It's ageless, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is a classic. Many people talk about Halloween and Jamie Lee Curtis as this iconic scream queen and one of the real originals because she's so enduring. She's been in this franchise for so long, and it has I think because they're making another film, it's soon going to be 9 films that she's been in since 1978 to current.
There's another 2 to be released, and I think due to COVID that might be sketchy, but they're released within very quick succession. So I think it's maybe 4 or 6 weeks apart. And then that's, as they say, the end of the franchise. I don't think there'll ever be an end of a franchise. I think they'll continue to reimagine the Halloween franchise in some regard. There's obviously been remakes, etc. Yeah, I think it's such a good movie. It's allowed, and let's be honest, some of the remakes, or not the remakes, but the sequels rather, are pretty ropey. So it's gone through a bit of a difficult journey. But I think when I went to see the recent one, Halloween, and again, Jamie Lee Curtis features, and actually it wasn't too shabby, to be fair. I don't think it's quite as loyal to the original as it could have been. But yeah, I think that in and of itself, I think there's been so successful, and it's led to is that people for the same reasons I like it must like it in the same way. It's loved, actually, I think, amongst the horror community, and for good reason.
If we get into the film, I thought one of the things we could talk about first, and I'll try and talk through it in terms of the order of what happens, but this film opens in a way that we have this extended opening credits sequence. So before we've seen anything, before they set up the film, the opening credit sequence really leans into the music that they're using. And John Carpenter wrote all of the music for this on his own, I think using a synth, which is incredible. And this opening music is it sets the tone in terms of this really sinister kind of thrilling film that's going to kind of hit you in that mark. There's these clashing notes, and it kind of, that opening sequence of all of these jack-o'-lanterns it's this jack-o'-lantern. It's kind of this slow pan into the camera. It's slowly zooming in, getting bigger and bigger. And it kind of, for me, watching that, and I was quite young when I watched this for the first time. So rewatching it now, I look at that and I just think that really primes you for what you're about to experience. How does the music sort of open this for you? Does it have that kind of impact?
I defy anyone to listen to the sound score in isolation and not be creeped out by it. It is chilling. It's he's incredibly talented, and I think without the film score, it wouldn't be half the film. The film score is essential to building the tension and getting you to the point where you're kind of you're uneasy. And again, I challenge anyone to listen to it. Maybe start at 12 noon, so it's nice and light, and then work up to watching it at 12 midnight. But yeah, it creeps me out to this day. It really is a chilling, chilling soundtrack.
Well, it's a soundtrack that when you watch horrors, like modern horror, you hear the kind of the style of it is like people are always trying to capture it, particularly in these kinds of slasher films where it is that you know, and this came from Hitchcock, who famously had the sort of sharp violins lined up to the stabbing of the knife, and so you never had to see the stabbing, you just had to know, like the music told us what was happening. And this really sort of harkens back to that, but innovates it and makes it even more kind of sinister and bigger. And the music, I think, for this film is a really defining element. And it takes us to this opening shot, which I think it's a 4 minute long point of view shot. And I must admit that when I first saw this film, the sort of reveal at the end of this 4 minutes was already spoiled for me. So I knew what was coming. But so did you, the first time you watched this, did you know that that was Michael Myers as a little boy walking through?
No, and I think, to be fair, I don't think I ever saw the full movie, and I saw bits of it as as someone in their maybe early teens. So you're kind of seeing snapshots of clips or bits, or I was probably towards my late teens before I saw it in its entirety. I was blissfully unaware of the kind of background that, for me, makes the plot even more believable. This isn't, someone that comes from, I always, poor Freddy Krueger, but I always seem to choose Freddy or Jason of the two I tend to pick on. But for me, I just switch off because I'm just, this is so far-fetched and so unbelievable. But, the plot is based on reality. People who are particularly unhinged, are currently within mental health establishments at the moment, and hopefully receiving the treatment that they require. But there will come a point where someone drops the ball, or procedures haven't been tightened, and something like this will happen again. And that's, to me, what makes it believable. And it's not the kind of Freddy that come up through the bath because you've fallen asleep for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
This is something that could happen in your neighbourhood tonight, and that's the bit that's extra creepy. And I suppose we've got to remember it was 1978, and certainly within the UK, you would have had 3 TV channels. Those TV channels would have switched off at 11:30, 12 o'clock at night. So we didn't have the same access to movies in the way we do now. I would imagine VHS and Betamax, if they were around, were very early on in the revolution. So movies weren't really about at the time. And I think to see a 6-year-old, and again, that's the reveal you're talking about, is where Michael Myers is unmasked, and the view changes to that of Michael, to that of his parents, and you see this 6-year-old almost standing in a daze with the knife. I think that would have. I think it's still quite shocking now if you were to see it for the first time. But I think to have seen it in 1978 would have been particularly, dare I say, provocative. I think people would have been really quite challenged by that, and that would have really messed with their mind, because I just don't think anything was out there of that style, substance. So I think it pushed the boundaries to some degree in terms of what had been shown in the big screen to that stage.
Definitely. And
quite groundbreaking is the term I'd use.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that particularly for this scene, so we sort of, it's all point of view, it's a single shot, and we sort of see Michael's sister Judith and a boy getting sort of a bit hot and heavy, and then they go upstairs for what is a very brief encounter, because like he walks around, gets a knife, and the guy's already coming downstairs. So it's like, righto, that was short. But
I watched that with my partner, and we both commented on that, to be fair. But that was a very quick encounter.
It was just like, he's already... But they had to get Judith alone. So I guess that was the reasoning. But it really, like, I wonder how it got past censors. I know 1978, there was a lot more scary horror. They were really breaking a lot of barriers. The sort of the restrictions of old Hollywood were falling away in a lot of ways. There were still lots of hangovers of them, but you could do a lot more than you used to be able to do. but they're still very careful in terms of how they show like stabbing, and particularly for this scene you kind of see the knife moving but you never quite see, like you never see the child doing it. You sort of, it's always from this point of view, and also you never quite see any kind of knife going into flesh kind of stabbing. And I wonder if that's how they got away with it, because it feels like something they should have, they shouldn't have gotten away with at that time, like with the sensibilities, and even with the kind of horror advances that were being made in the 70s and the 80s, it was really like pushing the limits of it.
I think certainly. I mean, you've touched upon it, but I mean, let's be honest. The murder scenes are not, they're not gory in the slightest. It's all very suggestive. It's very. And there's a lot of in the soundtrack, and it's all there, but you don't actually see much. And certainly from the the initial sort of 4 minute when Michael is killing his sister and putting a number of sustained blows with a knife, you see nothing. It's a very, she puts up very little defence as well. I have to say, it's almost like, oh, it's
to a 6-year-old
ready for her death. She's prepared for it. So again, you're absolutely right. There's that element of it's what you don't see, and I think that's a theme throughout the film, which allows your mind to make up its own mind, if that makes sense. And often that's worked for directors across a range of movies over the years. We've mentioned Jaws. Spielberg had planned to put the shark in a lot more because it looked so wooden and plastic and cardboardy. A lot of the footage that he planned to put in was on the cutting floor, and invariably that's what makes Jaws, certainly in my mind, a fantastic film. It's under the water, it's all suggestive, and that's what builds the tension, and I think that's what works for John Carpenter and Halloween as well.
It's quite interesting because, and in previous episodes of this podcast I've discussed this, but often the more you reveal, the more it shifts from terror into camp. So when you get something that's really gory, or like it starts to sort of verge on ridiculous, it starts to be funny, it starts to be silly, it starts to sort of be self-aware and almost making fun of itself. And I think the best scary movies always hold a bit back and give you that kind of, like, let your imagination do the final bit of the work.
So again, if we were to try and think of a film that was in the complete other extreme, so again within horror genre, I would maybe think of a film like Hostel or Saw, the Saw franchise. Let's be, frank, they're so unapologetically gory. In fact, they're deliberately gory to, evoke a reaction. I don't find that entertaining. That doesn't. I don't find that scary or on the edge of the seat. I'm kind of probably a bit, that's not nice to look at or appropriate, but I don't find it entertaining.
Yeah, it's funny, like something like Saw or Hostel, I don't sit there like waiting for the jump. I watch it and I know what's going to happen, and it's almost that thing of, because they often pay off with the, they set suspense and then they pay off suspense, and maybe if they kept a bit of mystery it would be a bit more scary, but it is that kind of gore porn that they do where
there's almost a bit and I certainly think in 1978 I don't think that they would have been able to, because I don't think the techniques were quite there, but I think if you'd gone down the gory route it would have made it a bit more of a caricature into film. It would have lessened the tension, because actually you and I would probably do a better job now with a camera phone in 2020 than they would have ever done in 1978 with a ketchup bottle, and you know where I'm coming from. And I think actually the fact that it has meant that it's been a lot, it stood the test of time much more, because the techniques used back then were pretty ropey but of their time.
After this initial setup and we sort of get this, Michael Myers is this criminally insane child, we cut to what is present day 1978 with his psychiatrist, Dr. Samuel Loomis, and a nurse, Marion Chambers, as they drive to collect him for a hearing. And I think what's really interesting in this scene is we kind of see a system that he's within, and that system is sort of working through to assess him and to look at, do they release him? And his psychiatrist is very much saying, well, this is a formality. We need to get him there in order to get him locked away for longer. And the nurse almost challenges him, or like, subtly criticizes him for his kind of lack of care to rehabilitate Michael. But he very much says, I did care for 7 years, and then another 8 years on top of that, I found that I couldn't help him. And we get this sort of is to get us to the inciting incident of this film, which is that we get to the sanatorium and all of the patients are out, and they're very concerned. He goes to get in the gate, and Michael Myers gets on the roof and attacks Marion, the nurse. Doesn't kill her, like breaks through the glass and is attacking her, but really his purpose is to get in the car. And he speeds off, and suddenly that kind of sense of, well, something's happening, this film is about to get moving. Where is he going? What is he doing? That's all kind of kicked off for us. And we very quickly after that meet Laurie, who is Jamie Lee Curtis, who is our protagonist, our leading lady, our scream queen for this film. What about that introduction of Laurie do you think kind of sets her up as this kind of character that we want to follow, we want to support, that the type of character that gets to survive?
Well, again, having done some reading about it, there's the element of, and I suppose I'm kind of skipping ahead slightly, but there's a whole bit of those who have lost their virginity buy it, or peg it at some point during the film, and good old Laurie, who's this sort of very academic, very illustrious, very hardworking, studious character, has kind of broken the mold of some of her pals. She's not smoking pot. She's not, got
she does smoke some pot, doesn't she?
What's that? Sorry.
She does smoke pot in the car. Doesn't
she has a quick spliff in the car, doesn't she? But again, it's there's a suggestion that she's different to her peers. I feel even the way she dresses to some degree is, and I suppose maybe if this was males might not be talking about how they dress, but she's quite frumpily dressed, I would suggest. But of course, it's the 70s, whereas I think her other female counterparts are a bit more provocatively dressed, if that makes sense. You certainly see a lot more flesh from her friends throughout the film that you maybe don't see with Laurie. But yeah, there's a curiosity. You begin to almost, you see the child that she begins to, or is planning to babysit later that night. And again, as Michael begins to, or he arrives at Haddonfield, begins to stalk Laurie. So he's shown an interest because, again, I think the loose element is her parents are selling the house, his old house that's not been lived in since 1963, etc. And she, I think, posts a key through the front door. And that's the tenuous link that then means he's now locked his sights on Laurie and plans to, do the deed, so to speak.
See, this is quite interesting, and I won't go too much into it because in a previous episode we covered Scream, and we talk about the rules of horror, and we talk about sort of where they come from. And there is this sense that under the Hays Code, which was a moral code that was governing Hollywood for a long time, as that code came out, as it sort of phased out, one of the ways that directors would get particular types of characters over the line is that they would be punished for their sins, or they would be, put forward as depraved. You look at Norman Bates in Psycho, and the cross-dressing is sort of then punished as, well, he's mentally ill, because they want to discourage that in society. The same can be said for the promiscuous woman always dying in a horror film, and often dying first is this kind of, a way to say, well, we're putting this character in there, but we're showing the consequences of living a sinful, and I use like inverted commas for that, a sinful life. And I feel like this movie really kind of leans into those tropes. And potentially because it is 1978 and they're still kind of finding their way out of it, or it could be that this is something that really kind of resonates with the psyche of the killer. Like Michael Myers decided to kill his sister after she had sex, and we see that we see Annie later, who dies. You know, her death is she's off on her way to get meet her boyfriend. We also see it with, I'm forgetting her name, Linda, who has sex and then dies, as does her boyfriend. And these kind of rules that kind of follow horror are quite sort of embedded, and I feel like this film in particular is one that served to embed that further. Um, as we kind of move forward through this, we get a few kind of foreshadowing moments. I think the big one is there's the break-in at the hardware store and they stole a Halloween mask and a kitchen knife, which...
And I get, it wasn't towards the very tail end of the movie that, again, Laurie unmasks Michael Myers for a fleeting second. And I then questioned why, in fact, he was wearing a mask at all. And it's been bugging me for a couple of days since watching the film. I was kind of, why did he need to wear a mask in the movie? Of course, it adds tension. There's no emotion. He becomes almost robotic. So I suppose a bit like the Terminator, he shows no emotion. He's this kind of the person that shows ultimate strength and blah blah blah. But I guess for me, I've kind of come to terms with it as he was trying to relive the dressing up, and because again, Michael, when he committed the first murder in 1963, was wearing a clown mask. So maybe in some way he's trying to relive the previous murder, and hence why he's put the mask on. I guess I'm giving John Carpenter an out and allowing him that one. But that was one question I had asked myself while watching it was, well, why is he wearing a mask at all?
Well, yeah, I wonder even if it's his kind of his battle garb, like he's trying to, he, this is a terrible comparison, but Beyonce is Sasha Fierce on stage. Michael Myers needs his mask in order to perform. It's something that is very much in the human condition that we wear different masks. When you go to work, you act different to how you act at home. When you're with your friends, you're different to how you are with your parents. And we have these masks in life, and maybe this is his kind of mask for what he does, which is murdering particularly young women who are babysitters.
So one thing I'm desperate to try and get in during this podcast is the element of trivia around his mask. I'm not sure if you were planning to cover it or you're even aware, but...
I think I know where this is going.
So my understanding, and I have to say this is probably leaning more towards my interest, I'm a real science fiction fan, a real Trekkie, love Star Trek, love Star Wars. My understanding is that the mask is actually a William Shatner Halloween mask, which they've effectively taken all the colourings off and painted white.
They have, and they've stretched it out a bit 20
years after I'd watched it, and again, it adds another kind of element of campness to it. Now that you watch that, it almost takes away the villainesque, murderesque kind of element to it. Now that you know that it's a William Shatner mask, to me, that's an element of campness in itself. Do you know?
Well, it is, and it's I think quite fun that this is this film that made all this money, is this huge cultural hit. And the thing that's most recognizable about it was like $2 and like a makeup artist spray painted it and stretched it out a bit, or a props artist, I should say. And we spend now, particularly now, we spend so much money making movies, and sort of these overwrought effects that don't always land and age very quickly, because if you're going to use any kind of CGI, anything digital, you are basically putting this movie is this old, and you will immediately 2 years down the track be able to go, "Ooh, that doesn't look good." And there's so much power in just leaning into, here's like something physical we bought for $2. We like did a bit of DIY on it and created possibly the most iconic horror mask in history.
Absolutely. And again, often I think big budget doesn't necessarily equal good film, and I'm sure we've seen lots of examples of that. But I think we certainly went through the late 90s, early 2000s where CGI was a really prominent element of filmmaking. It was actors talking to tennis balls and the end of sticks, etc. And to me, that lessened the movie. It made it less believable, certainly from my perspective, because the eye doesn't lie. What you see on the screen, if it doesn't cast a shadow or it's if it's CGI, it's CGI. It often doesn't age as well, and I don't think actors react with it in the same way. So often, you don't need a huge budget to make a fantastic film, and no better example of that than Halloween. I think having made so much money for what is a very low budget independent movie, and again, reading all these different sequels, it tells a story in of itself.
It's also so I teach film studies. I also teach media production at a university, and it's one of the things I really push with students who sort of will come to like, oh, I want to make a short film, but I don't have enough money, and I often will push them in the direction of horror and say, well, you don't need a lot of money to be scary. Look at the greats. Look at Hitchcock and how often he never quite told you what was going on. How much he hid. How much was suggestion. He himself has this great kind of lecture that he does about the idea of if you place a bomb, then you have just created tension and fear in everyone. If everyone sees you place a bomb, they are all waiting for it to go off. You don't have to set the bomb off in order to scare them. You've already scared them. You're building that tension. You can break it in a different way. So there is this great thing you can do without any money with horror, that you can just create and build tension, and you can just use formal techniques like cinematography and music and build something that is properly scary. You don't need special effects. You don't need corn syrup. You don't need to spend money on creating monsters, because we all create monsters in our head.
No, absolutely.
We should keep moving throughout the day in this day. And I should be noted, this film takes place basically in a day. If you discount the initial scene with Dr. Loomis and the nurse, this is a day. One day and 1 night.
Hours, yeah.
And we are getting to know Annie, but we're also getting to see Myers stalking her. And it's probably a good point to talk about, in later films, there's a revelation that Annie... Sorry, not Annie. What am I saying? Laurie is adopted.
Laurie.
And that she's actually Michael's younger sister. I don't know if... Do you subscribe to this?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, that's where it becomes... The kind of believable element then begins to evaporate. It's almost like they felt they had to have this tenuous link to... surely the link would have been that she was... Are you with me? She would have been there anyway, and that would have been a link in of itself. There's almost this insistence that there has to be a written down. It has to be somewhere in the script. Someone has to say what the link is. And people can't reach that conclusion themselves. Again, Michael Myers, you mentioned, steals the car from the sanatorium the night before. And again, you see Dr. Loomis in the early morning at the sanatorium interact with someone and mention that he must have been taught to drive, or because it's almost like they've went, okay, there's a loophole here, let's cover that off. So they've scripted in, someone in the sanatorium's taught him to drive, and there's a kind of lot of that, and the sequels, it kind of there's a compulsion to have to fill a loophole when actually. Audiences will fill that themselves. People who really begin to buy into a genre, actually, the more loopholes you have, sometimes that's why people are addicted to it, because they begin to fill the gaps themselves.
Well, and it creates discussion and debate, and it's what creates kind of your subculture of people who want to understand that film, and debate is great. Like, they should really encourage it. I'm with you. Like, they could have left that open. They could have left a lot of things open. They could have revealed that Lindsay was adopted. I'm not getting anyone's names right today. They could have revealed that Laurie was adopted, and not revealed that it was Michael. We could have said, oh, she must be Michael's little sister, and the parents must have died. Or they could have left that open in later films and let us kind of have those discussions and draw those conclusions. What we get to next, though, is that everyone's babysitting. Annie's looking after Lindsay, who that child actor has so much sass. I really enjoyed her. She just did not. Had zero fucks to give about Annie. She was just like, I just want to watch
That's very
TV. Laurie is looking after Tommy, and we very quickly, Michael starts to obsess over and to follow Annie, and he's kind of watching her through the window. I wonder if this is because she's the one that yelled at him when he sped past, and she said "speed kills," and then he stopped, and he went like that. Brought his focus onto her as someone connected to Laurie, but also someone that had kind of given him a reason to like, I'm going to focus on you. You're the next to die. She goes through a very strange process. So she's on the phone. I love this idea that all these people are babysitting and they just ring each other and chat to pass the time while they're looking after these kids. But she spills something on herself and immediately just strips off and puts on what I assume is the father of that house's business shirt.
Definitely asked that myself. That was a bit random. And again, it didn't appear that she spilled anything particularly drastic on her,
No.
It wasn't a vat of soup or do you know what I mean? It was a bit of tea by the looks of it. And to strip off to her tiny whiteies, I thought was a bit extreme.
She's out in the laundry and it gives Michael another opportunity to kind of taunt her a bit. Like he's sort of, the door's closing, he ends up locking the door and she gets trapped in there. And she's calling out to little Lindsay for help, but Lindsay can't hear her. And it's only when the phone rings and Annie's boyfriend, Paul, is asking for her, and Lindsay goes out and finds her sort of stuck in the window. She's kind of, her foot's trapped in something, and Lindsay has to get her out, and she runs back so she can tell Paul that she got stuck in the window, which I really loved, because it's like, this little girl who's clearly just doesn't like her babysitter is a bit over it and is just like, I just want to watch movies. And this lady is just ruining my night. And she runs back to the phone and she goes, she got stuck in the window before she hands over the phone, which I just loved. But it gets us to this point where we can, it sounds terrible to say, we can finally see a death in the film. So Annie's going to go pick up her boyfriend. She drops Lindsay with Laurie for the babysitting duties. And when she goes to her car, Michael pops up behind her and strangles her, which personally I found quite interesting because he is billed as a slasher and there are a couple of people that he doesn't stab. Like, he's got this kitchen knife, unless I missed something, but I've seen it a few times and I feel like it's purely a strangling death.
Yeah, I think that came later, and I think again going back to the very original 4 minutes, the slasher-esque bit is probably the bit that folk have seen. They might not have seen the full film, but they've seen the first 4 minutes, and that's this sort of blade. And a lot of the subsequent posters and references for the sequels often had a knife. In fact, the kind of beveled edge of the knife was the beveled edge of you call it a jack-o'-lantern, I would call it a pumpkin, but what was the kind of second half to the pumpkin was a beveled edge of a knife. So there's a lot of suggestive imagery on the kind of film posters and things. But again, if you watch a lot of the sequels, Michael has, and you could attribute it to his mental health, but has significant strength, probably more strength than I hate to use the term normal, but someone like perhaps you and I, in terms of normal sort of body strength, because of his mental abnormality or ill health, he has significant strength, and again is able to overpower quite a strapping young teenage lad. He
lifts him by his throat and up to the wall with one arm. One thing, sorry, you've just made me think of something when you said you call it a jack-o'-lantern, we call it a pumpkin. We don't celebrate Halloween in Australia.
Well, interestingly, it's if you rewind in Scotland to about 30 years ago, it was something we used to call it guising. In fact, a lot of people still do. And Halloween was taken to America by the Scots. It's a Scottish celebration that Scotland celebrated. But again, in the late 90s, Asda, which is a supermarket in the UK, was bought over by Walmart.
Ah, right.
Walmart started this October supermarket war, where they were all selling kids' outfits and all your sweet treats that you hand out for trick or treat. And almost overnight, I would say within about 5 years, Halloween went from 0 to 60 in Scotland and certainly the UK, and it's now a very big cultural celebration. But it was always in Scotland. Kids would go out guising, and we would call it guising. You would chap someone's door. You wouldn't say trick or treat, but you would be asked in with your costume, and you'd be asked to do a turn, is what they call it in Scotland. And you would say a joke, or you might sing a song, or you would do a turn, and you would be rewarded for your turn by maybe an apple or a tangerine or a satsuma, some monkey nuts, and then you'd be given a kick up the backside and shown the door. And that's where this kind of celebrations come from. So yeah, the Americans stole it from us in Scotland.
Well, so what's interesting is, so my only reference to Halloween was from American kind of television and film until I lived in Scotland, and then I sort of saw that it was celebrated somewhere else. But in recent years, like I'd say the last 10 years, there has been this kind of creeping celebration of Halloween in Australia. Not that we ever celebrate it, but we have had a few instances where people have shown up at our front door and we're like, what are you doing? We don't have any.
They've not quite got the trick or treat bit yet. It'll come. And I'll tell you why it'll come, because it's got a big price tag. I mean, in terms of the economy, if you're a supermarket and you can, because again, I would imagine for most cultures, October's a bit of a dead month. Maybe dead month's not the best word to use for Halloween, but it's a bit of a low month in terms of getting folk through the door and selling stuff. So you can, sell a lot of crap that you don't need in the hope that someone might then shovel it down kids' necks as they come round the door and do their turn.
So Annie dies in this car, and young Tommy is looking out the window. He looks out the window a lot because I feel like he's seen Michael a few times. He's worried, and he sees Michael carrying Annie back into the house. And there is this thing in horror films, like children often see things that others don't. It's almost like they're more observant, they're like less cynical about the world, and they're kind of wanting to look around. But of course, Laurie kind of calms him down, very quickly sort of gets back into a let's eat some popcorn and watch a movie kind of mindset. And then Linda and Bob come back. I was intrigued by, is it Linda's house that Annie's babysitting at? Like, why did Linda show up at this house? Or is that just something that people did? I feel like that'd be like a great breach of trust to invite your friends over to a house that you're babysitting at.
Yeah, again, that's a definite loophole that's not scripted for. It's not like, oh yeah, maybe one of you, he's been taught to drive. It's not along those lines. I did question that.
Well, because also they then go have sex in this house, which is like, God, I hope you live there.
And of course, if you were the parents returning at 11 o'clock to, 16, you would not be best pleased knowing that, a power of shagging had gone on. I think that's a definite, and it probably goes back to what you were talking about earlier on about this kind of moral code, this kind of Halloween moral code in some way. I think that kind of very much falls into that trap. Well,
Michael is not happy about that, and we very quickly have Bob is. Personally, I think this is the best death of the film. Just I like that it's it goes to what Myers is about. It uses his weapon of choice, the kitchen knife, but it also that strength that he demonstrates, where he lifts Bob up by his throat and then stabs him, and then the cleverness of what he does next, where he puts on the Halloween costume and Bob's it's Bob's glasses, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, and then he goes back to the room to kill Lindsay, but kill Linda. The names are too similar in this film because there's Lindsay, Linda, Laurie. Every time I was like writing, I'm like, hold on, which name is that? And we get this great kind of interaction between them where she doesn't know it's Michael, she thinks it's Bob, and she's kind of flirting with her killer and then turns her back on him to go call Laurie and say, talk to her, and he takes the
She's
phone
strangled
call
with the cord.
Yeah, and wraps it around her neck, and it gives Laurie this kind of something's wrong, I need to go over there. And I think this is where it gets scary. So for me, this is not a scary film from a I don't get scared in it because there's kind of tension and it's sinister, but we're sort of always seeing things from Michael's point of view. We see a lot of what he sees. So I'm not sitting there waiting for the thing to jump out at me. I kind of know what's coming. But this is the one scene where you get that.
I think for me, when he wears the bed sheet and he's now a ghost with the glasses on, and that adds a different dimension to the film because the audience are aware that Myers is under the bed sheet, dressed as this ghost. But of course, the intended victim, Linda, is it Linda? Have I got that right?
Yes, you do. It's Linda.
Yeah, it's far too similar. But again, Linda, buys it. But we know, again, I think the film's quite prescriptive. There's an inevitability about it. We know that it's got, but because that adds to the tension. You really, I can imagine audiences. I've never seen it in the cinema. It would be great to go and see it in the cinema, but I'm sure when folks saw this for the first time, be shouting at the screen, or I've sat in on many a couch and watched it, and friends have shouted at the screen, "Now get out, run!" All these kind of things that you're desperate to shout to poor Linda, who we know is going to peg it very shortly. And that, for me, is the tension builder. That's the bit that really adds the. I might not sleep tonight, and if I do, it's with the light on.
Well, yeah, and it's that thing we as we were talking about earlier with Hitchcock, we tell the audience more than we tell the characters and let the audience feel the tension, which is always it's such a great way to give to make them uncomfortable and give them something to kind of squirm about. Laurie, I'm going to get their names wrong for this whole thing. Laurie goes across and she finds Annie very artfully splayed on the bed. And
with the headstone?
Yes, with the headstone, with Judith's headstone. Yeah. Oh, I almost forgot. That is, again, I'd love to know the motivation behind that headstone for Annie. Is it, what's he trying to say?
So paint the scene. You've phoned your friend, you've heard her gargle on the other end. You're curious enough that you're going to go over. You can't get in the front door, so you go round to the back door. The back door's ajar. You stick your head in the door and you call your friend's name. You can't hear her. Personally, I wouldn't be going any further. And I guess this buys into the audience of shouting, "What are you doing? Why are you going? Don't go upstairs!" And don't go up here and don't do this. And that builds the tension. That helps. We know what's coming. We know what's going on in the house.
Well, and this is the first
Laurie
time
is still naive enough to want to go and find further,
Yeah, and this is the first time that I'm waiting for a jump scare in this, and it delivers. We get
absolutely delivers.
Yeah, we get this. Not only does she find Annie, then finds other body. She finds Linda and Bob's bodies sort of in closets and cupboards. And hold on, does Bob fall down?
Bob has. I think his legs in some way are above.
Yes, yeah, he falls down.
In the closet,
yeah,
and he kind of swings down through almost like the lower half of his torso, or the upper half of his torso is upside down and swings into sight.
Yes,
that's the first jump scare. But then she opens a cupboard or something, doesn't she? And of course, her friend Linda has been stowed away. Or not? I think it was Linda, or maybe it was one in the car. It was definitely Linda.
It was Linda, and he was on the bed.
She's stowed away in a cupboard. And then that's the bit you see Michael, she's turned her back. Why on earth she's still standing there, we still don't know. I would have been long gone. You would have not seen me for dust. But you see Michael very slowly pan into shot, very subtly. You see the mask. You obviously don't see his dungarees, etc., because they're quite dark, but you see that mask, that iconic mask. And for me, that's the icing on the cake. You've had the jump scare, as you call it, but then the audience is aware that he's behind her and he's going to strike any minute. And of course, he strikes with what is quite a pathetic glancing blow with the blade, and she manages to make off.
She makes off, but she falls down the stairs, and we get this great kind of scene where she's running and he's chasing her, and she's can't get out at the back door. He's kind of wedged it shut with the rake. He ends up breaking through one of the doors. She breaks the glass so that she can get out. And it is that kind of slow creeping horror that he is. He never runs. He kind of...
No, it's very deliberate and self-assured and mechanical. Robotics, a term I've used already.
Yeah.
Emotionless. Because again, he's playing this mentally deranged individual who, wouldn't maybe display or feel the same emotions you and I do. That really is drawn out at that stage where he's not running to catch her or quieten her. Or he's quite happy for her to scream and cry for help, and as she's running through the street. And interestingly, nobody comes to her assistance.
No,
it's quite a bustling street. Nobody seems to come to her assistance.
We haven't talked about it. Dr. Loomis is in town, like looking for Michael, and doesn't hear all this screaming in this small, quiet town. But she's at the door. She can't get in, and she calls to Tommy, who is very annoyed for a child, who slowly comes down and lets her in. She comes in. Tommy and Lindsay, she gets them to hide, and she ends up hiding. He comes into the house and she stabs him with the knitting needle, which I thought was funny because she was knitting earlier, wasn't she? Was she? Or was it just a needle in the house?
I didn't spot that. I didn't spot the knitting needle.
I feel like it would be very... I feel like it would be very, aligned to her character to be, knitting away. Maybe I've just imagined it.
Or something. Yeah, that's it.
But she gets him, and then she runs upstairs and hides in one of the closets and sort of waits for him. And he breaks through, sort of blindly grabbing, turns on the light, which I always love in horror films when it's we need someone to turn on a light so that we can see what happens. So they just create a reason for a light to come on. And she's
again for me the closet is the most flimsy. It's one of those kind of slats kind of thing which you could immediately put a foot through or an arm through and destroy, and particularly given his size and strength, he should have annihilated it. But he takes a good sort of 2 minutes to get through what is an incredibly flimsy closet.
He really does, doesn't he?
But he gets there.
He does.
Then, of course, she arms herself with a
coat hanger.
One of the kind of wire coat hangers you would get in a laundrette or a kind of dry cleaning place, and proceeds to stab him, doesn't she, in the face?
She does,
and then makes her break for it.
She does, and she.
Then I think.
Oh, sorry.
That's the bit where she unmasks him. That's this.
No, that comes a bit later.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Yeah. So no, she gets Lindsay and Tommy and says, "It's me. Run out and get help." And they run out of the street, and Dr. Loomis sees them. And then the camera's looking at her, and Michael Myers is lying down in the background, and you see him sit up.
Yeah.
That is one of the scariest moments for me, and it's that kind of evil can't die kind of trope in horror films where he just, no matter what you do, he just keeps coming.
Yeah.
And so they're struggling, and that's where she unmasks him, and it's possibly the thing that kind of saves her is he's sort of going back to that idea of the mask being really important to him kind of performing this task. He immediately wants to get it back on. He doesn't want to be revealed. And that gives Dr. Loomis a moment to shoot him, and then shoot him another 6 times. And
so I'd read, again, IMDb as your friend, I'd read that he is shot 7 times.
Oh.
And of course, he was only carrying a gun that would have 6 bullets. But I went back and watched it, and it is only 6 times. He only fires 6 shots. So he fires 1 shot, Michael Myers staggers back, and then another 5 shots ring out. So it was only ever 6 shots. So whatever IMDb, I think it's been a person on the kind of community forum type thing, but it's not factual. That's some fake news.
Yes,
people.
you have to check the credibility of your sources. Well, he falls out the window. We see him as an audience lying there, but by the time Dr. Loomis looks over the window ledge, he is gone. And we have what I think is a really great closer and something that sets this up, because we know that it's going to be a sequel and a sequel again and a sequel again, is that we finish on this kind of point of view shot again, the way that we started, with the heavy breathing, looking at the house, and then it cuts and it's the end of the film. And I think it's such a great way that really starts and ends in exactly the same way, and sets us up as an audience to be like, what will he do next? Well, we should start wrapping up. So before we do, I'd love to know, was there a campest line or moment of this film for you?
There's a lot of references to the boogeyman in the film, and of course there's very bit towards it, and we haven't mentioned it once yet, but Tommy mentions it umpteen times. Again, so does Laurie. It's almost that signposting for this, what they hope is going to become this iconic horror movie tagline, and it's actually really corny in my humble opinion. So yeah, that reference to the was that the boogeyman? And then Dr. Loomis, something along the lines of, yes, that was the boogeyman. Or, it's really cringe-worthily kind of ill thought out. It must have taken them about 5 minutes, and I'm maybe being generous, to be fair. That's my camp moment.
But I think the children in particular were very camp as like an insertion into this, because there was a bit of like, they were a bit silly, they were a bit sassy. I enjoyed sort of how the role that they played, because there was a bit of, they were aware of things, but they also weren't aware of things. And so they operated in a different place to everyone else and allowed us to have moments of camp kind of humor or silliness. Do you have a scariest moment in this?
Yeah, I can't remember the phrase you've coined. What's the phrase you call it, where they kind of jump out the ski moment?
The kind of jump scares, yeah.
Jump scares. To me, it's that bit where Laurie enters the bedroom, her friend's sprawled out, there's the headstone, and then the boyfriend and his torso, but it's not quite finished. And then at the very end, you know that Michael's just lurking there in the shadows. For me, that's the bit where, again, you would not have seen me for dust.
You would have been out of there.
Absolutely.
Now, the whole reason I have people on this podcast is to classify a film on the camp scary scale. So it's a scale of classification, not a scale of value. So the numbers are purely to show where it lands on that scale. So it's from divine camp to pure terror. Where do you think this film lands for you?
I'm certainly edging on the towards pure terror. So if pure terror is what, a 10 on the Richter scale, and divine camp's a 0 on the Richter scale, I'm probably somewhere about an 8, leaning towards the scare camp. And I think, we spoke about it earlier. If we take away the soundtrack, this movie's maybe not got it. But I think the two combined, the soundtrack and the quite prescriptive, methodical kind of almost horror by numbers elements to it, to me, and that extra sort of addition of element of realism. This could happen, and has happened, and will happen again. To me, that's what really pushes it towards that scary element.
Yeah. So potentially, sort of one from the pure terror end of this scale is predominantly scary, but just incidentally camp. So they haven't purposely made anything camp, but there are just some moments of levity, whether it's Laurie and her friends at the beginning, or sort of the sass from those little kids. I feel like it fits there for me too. It is at its heart a good scary movie, and I think for me, like, a good scary movie always has to have some camp to it, because that's how you get the audience to relax so that you can scare them. Thank you, Fraser, for joining me for an episode of Camp, Scary and Squee. It was really great to talk about Halloween. We didn't talk about Jamie Lee Curtis as much as I thought we would, as two gay men who are obsessed with Scream Queens, but But it was really great to have you on and to talk about this film. For those of you at home, you can follow Camp Scary and Squee on Instagram and Twitter by going to @CampScaryPod. If you have questions or suggestions, you can email campscarysquee@gmail.com. And make sure to rate and review Camp Scary and Squee so other horror fans can find us. Thank you for joining us, and remember, don't scream.
They'll hear you.
Love it. I find it funny because you say pegging it,
Pegging it.
which
Does that mean shagging in Australia?
well,
if you
no,
peg someone, you shag someone.
no, it doesn't. Well, it kind of does, but no, not quite. Pegging is where a woman puts on a strap on and fucks out, like fucks them.
No, that's not what we call it here.
So, like, you're going,
Well,
they're
maybe
pegging it, and I was
some
like,
of your listeners
"There's
will be
pegging
quite
in this?"
taken by that notion. A lot of folk get pegged in this movie. You might find it a sales source.
Yeah, people will be like, "Oh my god, I had